everyone, thanks for tuning in today. I'm Nicole Forbes with Dennis's 7Ds, and today we're learning all about growing citrus in the Pacific Northwest. So it is a topic that, is worth spending a little bit of time discussing, not only because there are some special conditions that we need to be aware of for growing citrus in our climate, but citrus is such a wonderful plant to grow. Not only is it a self-fertile, reliable fruit-producing plant, but it is able to be grown in containers. We can, with some supplemental lighting, we can grow them indoors or outdoors with winter protection. And in addition to that fruit that they provide us with, the flowers, the fragrance of the flowers is just stunning. And it's rare, I think, as Oregonians, that we get to, do like side-by-side smell-offs with different citrus. But this morning, here in the classroom, we've been able to pull together some different citrus plants that are in bloom, including a navel orange, or is this a blood orange? I think this is a navel orange. And the navel orange gives us this beautiful sweet fragrance with a fairly large white flower. And then we also have a couple of lemons, and the Meyer lemon has a slightly smaller white flower, but the fragrance note on the Meyer lemon is just a little bit of a higher note, just a little bit more spicy, I guess I would say. So oranges are sweeter, lemons are spicier. So no matter what, the fragrance of these flowers is amazing, and they'll fill a room with their scent. So as we brought these in here, the room is starting to really have this wonderful orange blossom, lemon blossom mashup aroma, which is just fabulous. So growing citrus in our climate is just slightly out of the typical citrus climate zones. So most of our citrus plants, for example, the Meyer lemon, would be hardy to zone 9. So we're looking at like minimum winter temperatures of about 30 degrees. Now, my mom has a mandarin orange, like a little, clementine type mandarin orange, that she lives in Napa. And so of course I'm always watching the temperature, what is it freezing for mom? What's mom's temperature like? And in wintertime, her cold temperatures are pretty close to our cold temperatures, if not just slightly elevated. Now her citrus plant grows up against the side of her house as well, and we know that there are areas in our homes and gardens that provide microclimates or extra protection. So that's one of those areas, is up against a house. But that Northern California kind of line is about the furthest north that a citrus can safely grow in the ground and stay out year-round without seeing any kind of damage through winter. But even so, like I mentioned, best to be in some of a protected space for extreme cold. Now, I have also been down to, and many of us have, Southern California and areas in Florida where you can walk along and pick a grapefruit out of somebody's backyard. So the range of citrus, where it grows and how it grows, is all really dependent on, of course, winter temperatures. So for us in the Pacific Northwest, we keep citrus in containers, and they don't need a huge pot, which is a nice, or a convenience, so that we can keep them in relatively small containers and slowly size them up as the plants need larger containers, or we can treat them like a bonsai and remove them from their pots every so often, trim the roots and refresh the soil, and then just repot them right back into the same size container. And because occasionally for winter months, often gardeners are moving their citrus plants from one location to another, being able to keep it in a manageable size container is really going to end up being, you know, a back saver, if nothing more. So, you know, considering how large your container is and whether you can, you know, get it through the basement door, if you do have to hustle it down for some, you know, quick winter protection. The native soil, we'll say, the native soil that most citrus grows in is somewhat poor, kind of a thin, more of a sandy soil or a faster draining soil. So when we pot citrus into containers, we recommend, first off, a real water holding, like peat-based soil is not ideal for citrus growing. The opposite is actually best to keep citrus, and that would be a potting soil that has a lot of loosening agents that help let air and water move through the container. So G&B makes a really great palm, cactus, and citrus planting mix. This is also good for succulents and plumerias. This can be just poured straight into a pot and used as the repotting medium for your citrus plants. And it's got a fair amount of sand. You know, I always like to show examples. So here's a beautiful example of that soil. So it does have, you see the little white bits are pieces of pumice for loosening agents. It has quite a bit of sand and a little bit of bark even in it. You can maybe see the bark components. So it's a very coarse, fast draining soil medium instead of the opposite, which would be a real spongy water holding water medium or planting medium such as the peat moss based soils. If you do have peat soils or you're unable to find or you know don't want to go out and get yourself the cactus and citrus planting mix, pumice or even you know some stones and pebbles are good to add to the soil. Pumice is similar to stone. It's heavier than perlite, so it stays kind of where it's put instead of sinking to the ground or sinking down in the container or floating upwards like perlite does. But pumice just mixed into regular potting soil at maybe a 25-30% ratio is going to also help to open up that real water holding media to just allow drainage and air to flow better, and that's what citrus prefer. So minimum temperatures, as I mentioned, about 30 degrees. We can see damage to the plants as we go below 30 degrees, definitely damage to above ground growth, and ultimately if prolonged below 30 degrees temperatures, the roots can start to suffer and it can be fatal to the plants. So in the regular growing season, we can keep our citrus plants, you know, out on the deck or on the patio or in the house. But they do, if outdoors, they need like 6 to 8 hours of direct sunlight each day or bright light, similar to where you would grow a tomato or a rose. And the more sunlight, the more brightness, the better odds that you'll have flowers set, and of course flowers then go to fruit. So at least 6 to 8 hours each day during the growing season. And when they're moved into the house as well, if they're moved into the house in the winter, they need a similar bright light condition. So moving them towards the south exposed windows, so into the south of the house, and making sure that even in that case they may need supplemental lighting. So you may need to give them like a seed starting light or some sort of overhead light to just amplify what natural light they get in the wintertime. It is, we've got the well draining soil and we're keeping it in a container, so it's pretty normal that a citrus plant goes somewhat dry in between waterings, but we do want to let, you know, the top several inches dry out in between watering on citrus, and they, depending on how much sun and wind exposure they get, you'll notice that the very newest of leaves out on the tips, they're tender and soft. And so in early signs of not enough water, the very first thing that you'll see is a little bit of a sag on the new leaves. So that's a good indication that you need to just increase your watering by a couple of hours or a day or so to get those leaves less likely to wilt. But we don't want to water daily, for example, on a citrus plant unless it's drying out that 2 to 3 inches down from the soil surface. Giving them a chance to dry it in between is a critical aspect for just their growth and their health. Now that also goes to keeping them in a container. The best container size is relatively small, so they do like to be somewhat root bound. If you took home a 5-gallon lemon today, or this orange, we take home this nice 5-gallon orange today, this could stay in this container at least for another 6 weeks or so. We could repot it before fall, before it kind of slows down growing this fall, or we could decide that this is the container it's going to grow in this year and repot it next spring as it begins to grow in April or even May. So when we repot, ideally you're going to go up in size about 2 to 3 inches or so in diameter, and not much deeper. So they would prefer a wider pot. The depth doesn't have to increase as much over time as the width. And the best media for the pot is actually like a rough unglazed clay. So we call these terracotta pots, which is just kind of that old-fashioned simple clay pot. Now there's no glaze on this, which means that moisture can kind of evaporate through the walls of the container as well as be consumed by the roots or evaporate from the soil surface. And so this is again a container that kind of helps the roots to breathe instead of letting them get a little bit wetter than they might want. So plastic containers, glazed ceramic pots, those will hold more moisture than a typical unglazed terracotta container does. So that's really the best. And they're easy to come by and relatively inexpensive. You will find a range of quality of terracotta containers, and typically the Italian clay is going to do better in our wet winters than like a Mexican clay would. So just if anything, if you're kind of checking on quality, look for the source of where the pottery came from, and that'll help you to determine how well it's going to make it through winter. It's easy to keep citrus happy in those containers with the proper soil and a regular fertilizing through the growing season. And again, they have some citrus have some specific needs, but they're worth it in all aspects. They have a fertilizer that they prefer, which is a citrus and fruit tree fertilizer. So G&B makes this nice organic blend that is 8-4-2 as far as the numbers go. So that's a 4-to-1 ratio if you're following along at home. But the citrus and fruit tree fertilizer for containerized plants, for containerized plants, it's recommended that you feed about every 4 to 6 weeks to keep the plants nourished and happy through the growing season. So that would probably begin in about April as you bring the plants, as they start to regrow and warm up. And then you're going to do your last fertilizing in kind of mid to late August. So then we allow the plants to slow their growth as the natural kind of season progresses into fall and winter. The focus of the plant at that point doesn't push a lot of growth. In fall and winter, the fruits are actually ripening more. So the plant really focuses on ripening all the fruits rather than putting out a lot of new leaves and new growth. Right now, we see new leaves and new growth coming on, as well as some flowers and fruits forming. So the plant's working really hard at the moment, which means that it's a good idea to give it extra nutrition. Now, citrus from lemons to oranges to grapefruits to, mandarins, these are ultimately good-sized trees. If they were growing in the wild, so to speak, or they're growing in a climate where they could get planted in the ground, they would grow to be fairly good-sized, small trees, but still fairly good-sized trees. We are not going to see that kind of growth achieved due to the fact that they're going to be in containers for their lives, and also because they're tolerant of pruning quite easily, and they're going to be slowed down in growth. Now also, we have several different varieties that are just simply dwarfs. So like the Meyer Improved Lemon is a compact or more dwarf form of the larger standard Eureka lemon or other lemon plants. So pruning is easy on lemons. The flowers tend to come on new growth or on current season's growth. So when they are in an in-between blooming stage is the best time to prune. And we see on the orange here where it's been pruned. See if I can get a good view of this. So where the orange was recently pruned, we have new growth that's already coming back from the top. Can you see that all right? Yeah. So everywhere where we actually do cut the plant, that stimulates some new growth to come out, which then just helps to kind of renew and refresh the plant, not to mention keep it a little bit more compact. So we have a nice compact form instead of something that grows a little bit loose and airy. Now, when you're working with most citrus plants and you're maybe getting into the inside of the plant to take an old branch off or to thin or pull out a dead leaf, it is also important to realize that they have fairly mean thorns. I'm looking here to see if I can find a thorn on an easy to show thorn. Oh yeah, this lemon's got mean thorns. So the thorns, of course, just like in most plant cases, the thorns are there to protect their, precious fruits. But here's a nasty, sharp, almost half-inch long, very stiff thorn. So that is going to do some damage if you just, grabbed or reached into the plant, or even, tried to pet it or rub up against it. So don't go rubbing up against your citrus plants. There are better plants in the garden to go rolling around in. But important at least also to just realize that the plant's making some effort to protect itself and guard against its fruits from being poached by other critters. Now, just like a lot of other tropical plants, citrus we can consider a tropical plant. They will take the hot afternoon sun, but they could also, if they're getting that 6 to 8 hours of direct sunlight at some point throughout the day, they could have a little bit of protection from hot afternoon sun. Hot afternoon sun will prematurely wilt flowers, so it does make flowers kind of fade faster than they normally would if they were out of that hot afternoon sun. And hot afternoon sun, especially reflective heat like we would have from a citrus that grew maybe on a potted citrus on our deck or on a patio where it's getting bounced back radiant heat. Full hot afternoon sun, radiant heat, and a plant such as a citrus all line up to the perfect conditions to come down with a pest infestation of spider mites. And spider mites are typically a summer pest, but spider mites can then come into the house with our plant or into protection, whether go to a greenhouse or a shed or up against the house and protect it for winter. They can move with the plant into that protected space, and we end up protecting the pest as well as the plant, which then ultimately does not go as well as we had hoped when it comes to keeping the plant healthy. So avoiding those hot, intense sun conditions can at least kind of reduce the odds that you're going to come down with a spider mite infestation. but it's always wise to be aware of the common pests that your beloved plant will potentially come down with, so that as you are examining the plant or working with the plant, you can make sure that you are checking for early signs of the pest. So spider mites are a hard one to catch, and here at our garden centers, we're always happy to help diagnose any kind of problem that you're dealing with. We just ask that you bring your problem in somewhat contained. So if you want to bring us a few leaves to check for spider mites, put them in a Ziploc baggie or a jar so that we don't have pests running wild. And that way we'll be able to help you and send you on your way with proper solutions. Now, spider mites, again, they kind of create a dull look on the plant. The first thing you see is that the leaves aren't so shiny anymore, but they just kind of have a slightly grayish green dull look to them. It's not a spider, it's a spider mite. So spider mites are as small as like a period on fine print paper or like a dot over an I. They're so tiny that there's usually a whole bunch of spider mites all together, not just one little spider mite doing damage. They are, when they get to be big in numbers, you can sometimes see a very, very fine webbing that kind of coats the plant itself. Not like Charlotte's Web, spider web, but a really fine kind of webbing, silky layering over the plant. The standard spider is typically a carnivore. So good old Charlotte and her family, the standard spiders in our garden eat other bugs. They don't eat our plants. A spider mite pierces and sucks up the juices of our plants, like a little tiny plant vampire. And there's like a huge, like I said, 1,000 of them at once. So it's kind of death by 1,000 pinpricks is what slowly happens to our plants over time with spider mites. Usually oils are the best way to deal with them or control spider mites, but then there's also lots of beneficials such as ladybugs and spiders, as I mentioned, that will help to control mites, especially outside. Now, there are a few other pests that are going to bother your citrus, primarily mealybugs and scale. So just, again, I don't want to get into too much, bummer stuff on pests, but it's important to know those. Do a little internet search and look and see what mealybug looks like or what scale looks like, so that you are able to anticipate that or watch for signs of it on your regular care regimen. Now, let's talk about winter and how we deal with citrus in the wintertime, because I think that that's probably the biggest, that's the biggest issue. That's the biggest question. Everybody wants to kind of know what they do. So there's two camps. The camp one is citrus grow outside from Easter to approximately Halloween, give or take a week to 10 days on either side, where they can come out after we've passed our average last frost date. So typically that's April 15th, so they come out mid-April. And then they want to go inside before our average first frost date, which can be anywhere from early to mid-November. So typically by Halloween. I like to just, Easter and Halloween, that's pretty good holidays to hang your citrus hat on. So while the citrus live outside during the active growing months, that could be also the time of year that we are fertilizing them, although we want to stop in August. They can live in, wherever they want, where they're getting that 6 to 8 hours of sun. And then on the change of weather, as we get into a rainier pattern, colder fall weather starts to set in, and we're, approaching the Halloween date on our calendars, we're going to bring our citrus plants indoors or into a brightly lit shed or a greenhouse that doesn't go below 30 degrees, or some other area for winter protection. Now, ideally, anytime we're making such a major move for a plant, going from outside to inside, or from out on the deck to now kind of, in the tool shed, near a window, those big changes ideally will be done over the course of 3, 5, even up to days or even up to a week. So moving the plant into a slightly less bright light condition, and then even ever so slightly lower light will help it to acclimate into that lower light without having such sudden shock of going from outside to inside. The same would be when you bring the plant back out in that April, mid to late April, is bringing it out in less than full sun, first of all, because it hasn't seen full sun. It's like us, right? Hasn't seen full sun all winter long. You're going to get a sunburn if you just go out naked and lay there for 6 to 8 hours the first day. No matter how much you want to, you'll get your vitamin D in small doses. And same with the citrus, it's going to do better with a gradual transition back out into that full sun. Now, a weird thing happens to citrus when it changes lighting. And the weird thing is that the plant's response is usually to drop the leaves that it has currently grown and regrow new leaves to reflect the change in its situation. So in brighter light, citrus tend to have a slightly smaller leaf that has a waxier surface, so a little bit thicker, a little bit tougher, and slightly smaller than if it were grown in lower light conditions. The leaves tend to be slightly larger, and they don't develop such a stiff, waxy coating over top of them. They're a little bit more flexible and softer. So rather than just kind of changing the leaf that it currently possesses, it drops the sun leaves, for example, to now regrow the lower light or shade leaves that'll help it through the winter. And then when it goes back out, it's also going to do the same thing. It's going to drop a ton of those winter indoor leaves to now be better prepared for the outside sunnier leaves. So you'll see that happen, and it's very disconcerting for most of us citrus growers, especially the first season when you've worked all season long to keep it happy, indoors or outdoors, and then suddenly it starts to, dramatically drop lots of leaves. The good thing is, in most cases, simultaneously, it's putting out new growth. So it doesn't look like it's dead, it just looks like it's really hurting for something. And now it's basically natural. It's just responding to the change. So this indoor time span from October through April that our citrus grows indoors, if we are of this first camp that brings our plants indoors, this can be a really hard time for the citrus. Because of the pests that I mentioned previously, mealybugs, spider mites, and scale, the plants often already have a kind of slight infestation. Well, they're just like packing some bugs on them already. It's a pretty delicate balance, but it's maintained outside. The balance is good bugs, bad bugs, weather, everything kind of keeps all of these issues in check. But as soon as that citrus comes indoors with a couple of pests hitchhiking on there, they no longer have their natural outdoor predators. They have ideal weather conditions to thrive, and they just happen to be like vacationing on their favorite plant, right? So not only have we brought our citrus in for protection, we've brought all these pests in to protect as well. So often we see that pest infestation a month or 6 weeks after bringing the plants in. It's always a good idea before you bring a plant that's lived outdoors inside to assume that it has a mild pest infestation and treat it accordingly immediately. So spray it with a soap spray or neem oil or your preferred insecticidal spray or treatment to make sure that it's not bringing pests inside. If you are 100% opposed to spraying something, then bring the plant indoors into a quarantine space where you have no other plants and you can observe it for the first 2 weeks or so to make sure that while in quarantine it doesn't develop, again, a pest issue that you would otherwise see spread to your other plants. Okay, so back to winter care and winter treatment. That first group in the house, as I mentioned before, that plant's probably going to have some supplemental watering, but occasionally as it's growing less, and special lighting, because most of our indoor conditions don't provide that 6 to 8 hours of direct sun, especially in the wintertime. So south window at best, but still supplemental lighting. Get your little seed starting light and put it on your citrus as well. Now, for those of us that don't want to have all of the potential complications of bringing the citrus inside because of all of these pest issues that, maybe that's happened to you in the past, you can leave potted citrus outdoors for the majority of our winter here in the Portland metro area. I live, in Portland proper. We don't have, we have winter, but our winter is cyclical, so some winters are really mild and others are much more extreme or last longer. But I'm not on high elevation. I get some of the east winds, but I just put my plants in different spots. And so, it's average Portland area climate. And if you are in high elevation, if you're at the coast, just pay attention to the different areas that you live in. For me, about mid-October, my citrus plants go up against my house. So the house is 2 stories with a eave that then shadows any of the early fall rain. So late summer, early fall, we start getting rain again. And I really want to start kind of controlling how wet those citrus plants stay. So I want to stop the rain from really falling on them so that I'm the one that waters. So I bring them up against the house where the eave stops the rain. And already up against the house, they're on the southwest corner of the house, on the south side, but right at that southwest corner. That gives them a lot of light and the beginnings of that kind of sheltered protection that my house itself provides. Now, it's right around, let's say Christmas, right after Christmas, no, sorry, before that. So Halloween, then Thanksgiving. About Thanksgiving is when I'm taking all my tomatoes, or the last of the tomatoes come out of the garden. The garden's going to kind of take it, all the summer crops are gone, and I end up with a tomato cage, or several tomato cages as my tomatoes are wrapped up for the season. So a tomato cage ends up being a pretty good support for providing some winter protection for a larger citrus plant. So I'm just going to kind of show how I do this. Now, if you have a smaller citrus, instead of a tomato cage, you could use stakes. So I'll give you the idea of what we're doing here. It's in its pot. It's been moved into a more protected location. Here's our, ouch, lemon. So we take our smaller container with just something as simple as bamboo stakes. 3 bamboo stakes, even 2, pushed into the soil. Now give us a nice framework to then lay some frost cloth or protection over it. Now, a plant this small, honestly, you could use a pillowcase, you could use an old bath towel, sheets are great, something that is fabric is going to be better than plastic. So even think, gosh, if you've got nothing better, wrap it in a paper bag and just secure that paper bag overnight. That's going to just give the plant extra insulation. We have frost cloth that we sell here at the garden centers that has so many different purposes. I use mine in the garden for so many things. It's called Harvest Guard. And this is a package that's 5 by 5 by 25. So seed germination and garden protection. So as we're coming into like fall and winter gardening, vegetable gardening time, we're going to be talking about that in a couple of weeks. This is really helpful to provide early shade for kind of tender plants in the intensity of summer sun. This helps cool and insulate and keep soil moist while you're waiting for summer seeds to germinate. It's very light and gauzy or airy, so light does come through it, but it also can lay on a plant without like completely flopping the plant over. And for winter protection, you could do a single layer, you could do a double layer. Just fold this twice, and now because I have the little poles over my lemon, I can wrap it with the cloth and just pull it tight enough that it's not, of course, going to blow away in the gale of the storm that's coming. Now, you could use something like a bungee cord, you could use twine, anything to just secure this, or clip it down. I love to use various sized binder clips that most of us can raid from the office supply closet. But binder clips can fit right down onto the pot itself and just clip that fabric right down onto the edge of your container. So again, there's probably lots of different sizes in the supply closet, so choose accordingly. Binder clips can also just attach the two pieces of fabric together at the seam. Well, you get what I'm talking about. So they can be used to secure on the sides or down towards the container itself. I'm sure you could use all kinds of other things, but I love binder clips for so many other useful reasons. So that's how to do a smaller container. But so larger pot, Thanksgiving, right? We're usually getting our first frost or have had our first frost right about then. So we can take our tomato cage now, put it over top. This is not the one I was going to do because it's so big and fluffy, but we'll get the picture. Push those little legs down into the container so it's got the support it needs. This is why we tell you to put your cage on before your tomato is too big. Okay. And then, same idea. Now, of course, I could push this further down into the pot, but I'd have to prune this little lemon. I don't want to do that. So same idea. When we get a nice frost, to protect that plant, we would drape the entire plant with the frost cloth. Make sure it's nice and covered. My piece is too small. And you could, again, a bungee cord, your different little binder clips could attach it to the tomato cage itself. This gives us quite a bit of just like top protection, frost protection from just a light frost or two. Now, as we progress into colder winter conditions, the pot itself and the roots of the citrus may also need to be protected. So you have options for protecting the pot or the root ball, which include just giving it insulation. So we often just talk about using like bubble wrap from the UPS store or whatever. Bubble wrap makes nice insulation. You could do a couple layers of bubble wrap around the actual outside of the pot itself, and then wrap the bubble wrap in something like a burlap, an army surplus blanket, something like that, just to make it look a little bit more attractive. We also have rolls of burlap here at the garden center, and this burlap that just talked about again, plant protection, windscreen, tree wraps, and arts and crafts. So really, you've got it all right in one spot. The burlap can be used several sheets around to again achieve that plant protection. Doesn't have the light, the airiness, and it also doesn't allow as much light to penetrate the more layers you do of burlap. But burlap will also work as top protection or as something that you can wrap the bottom of the container to protect the roots from drying out. Now, I leave the cage on or the poles on, and I'll take the frost cloth off when the weather is better. So, you know, we'll go several days of nicer weather, and then we'll get our frosts again. You take it off during the day, put it on at night. You know, depends on how much you want to dote on your citrus. But at some point you're going to need to scale up your winter protection just one more step, and that typically for me and for, you know, our average Portland winters, the next kind of extreme temperature conditions start coming after Christmas. So often we get, you know, our worst weather comes in January, February. So I wait until Christmas is over and then use the little incandescent Christmas lights, you know, just like the twinkle lights that you have on your porch or whatever. I don't have LEDs, I still have the old-fashioned ones, which actually create a little bit of heat when they're plugged in. So those twinkle lights, now that you're undecorating from the holidays, you could wrap a set of 50 twinkle lights over an average tomato cage, just wrapping it around the wire, kind of, you know, encasing the cage itself. Ends up being very festive, and as those lights get plugged in during cold conditions, they can also increase, not by much, but a few degrees, they can increase the temperature around that citrus, which, followed by the enclosure of a frost blanket, is going to keep it quite nice and toasty in those extreme temperature conditions. Now, if we are talking about, well, not we, if they're on the news talking about the storm of the century, if they are, you know, telling us all to go out and stock up on, well, it's Portland, right? So kale. If we're out running the kale for the storm, instead, you probably want to spend your time moving these plants into actual warmer conditions for the duration of the extreme temperature event. So if it's going to last for 5 days, if it's going to last for 7 or 10 days, that's a prolonged extreme below the comfort zone of the citrus plant, and we risk freezing the roots and everything in that kind of condition. So at that point, you're better to bring it all the way into a space that does not go below 30 degrees. And in many cases, that's going to be your garage, your shed, or right into your house. That goes back then to the smaller the pot, the lighter the container, the easier it is to move when that time comes. So plastic pots are just fine, and this is a perfect size for a starter container. So a 1 gallon lemon could easily fit into this nice size container, which is only about 2 inches increased in diameter all around, and just a little bit deeper than the container that it's originally in. And then this I can easily move on my own for several seasons before I either choose to pot it up into a larger container or get an easier way, you know, some assistance to move it in and out. But once your citrus plants get fairly good size, they can be heavy. I mean, this isn't bad right now, but it's in a plastic pot and it's pretty dry because we haven't watered it in a few days. But once this got potted into a ceramic container, maybe slightly larger pot, it's going to be a lot to move around, and especially if you're on your own, going, you know, around the side gate and into the garage or something like that. So we do have these really great rolling plant saucers. So again, great wheels on here. They have a locking mechanism. This can save your back and a lot of squabbling between you and your partner who is helping bring all these plants in when it's cold and they just want to go to the store and buy kale. So anyhow, I think that has about covered our citrus in the Portland metro area, or growing citrus in the Pacific Northwest. I just brought into the classroom today, the break room, a lovely palm to hide the microwave, of course. And this is a windmill palm, and windmill palms are one of the hardier palms to grow in the Portland metro area. So windmill palms could grow in the ground and be considered hardy outdoors. In a container, windmill palms may need a little extra protection, but nothing quite as extreme as what we were talking about with the citrus. And then I also have some blood bananas, which are a tropical banana plant that won't make bananas for us like lemons will make lemons, but the foliage of the blood banana has this really great kind of red and green pattern on it. These can be grown outdoors during the spring and summer, and then actually be potted and brought into the house as a house plant through the winter months. So again, not a hardy outdoor plant year round, but something that you could convert into just growing indoors and having that dramatic banana look and feel in the house as well. And then up here, just to kind of keep on the tropical theme, I did bring a few mandevillas in today. So this is a dwarf red mandevilla that has a viney habit. You can see here just a little bit of its tendrils starting to climb, but mandevillas are another one of those tropical plants that we love through the summer months here in the Portland area, but without greenhousing or special protection through the winter, they cannot stay outdoors and live in our winter temperatures without protection. So that's kind of a just roundabout on various tropical plants here at the garden centers, and our most popular tropical plant, which is the citrus in general, and how to grow them here in the Pacific Northwest. Thanks for watching. Happy gardening.